Hey everyone, and welcome to the Azure All Stars podcast. This is the second episode. I'm your host, Ahmed.
And I'm Luke, and we're your hosts for this podcast.
Yep. And for our guest today is Matt Allford, and I'll give him actually the chance to introduce himself.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Really happy to be here and have this conversation. I've been looking forward to this all week since Luke set it up earlier in the week. So, yeah, my name's Matt Allford. I live on an island like you guys, but I'm across a little bit. I'm down in Tasmania, off the bottom of Australia. So
Nice.
We all know that island life. Mine's a bit smaller than yours, though. So, yeah, that's me. I work for a company that's primarily based in Auckland, actually, named PowerShell, who have gone through a few acquisitions over the last couple of years, and I'm now part of a larger global group called Crayon, doing all things in the world of cloud. So it's been pretty fun.
Awesome, I like the name Crayon because it's like you can just it's a whole Lego analogy, right? It's like different colors, different things. Yeah.
Yep.
Put it all together.
Yep.
Thank you for accepting the offer and for coming into our podcast, Matt. That's awesome. Yeah. So actually, before we jump into the podcast, let's talk about the big news, which is like build is actually just around the corner. Do you've got anything interesting you're looking forward to, Luke?
Yeah, it's all a bit interesting. There are a couple of sessions that I was looking forward to with Scott Hanselman and Mark Rasimic talking and learning how to code with Copilot, but I think it might be in person only. I don't know if it's recorded, but if it is, I'll definitely be looking up for that. But there's another session on Azure Communication Services that I'm looking forward to as well. It's not an area that I do much with day to day, but I've seen it work. So people using communication services to bring people into Teams meetings and things like that using custom apps. So I'm looking forward to that session.
So when you say communication, you're not talking about networking. You're talking about actually
video and audio communication. Yeah, so using Azure Media Services and stuff to bring in. It's quite fascinating. It's not an area that I, as an infrastructure guy, I delve into, but it's an area that I think will be worth looking out for. But it is at 3:30 New Zealand start time AM in the morning. So I'll be watching the recordings mostly.
Nice. How about you, Matt? You've got something you're looking forward to?
Yeah, I've scanned some of the build sessions, and I only just registered myself literally yesterday, so I'm running a bit behind. But I saw the same session that Luke mentioned about Scott and Mark learn to code. I thought that would have been really cool, but as he said, it might be in person only. So hopefully there's a recording of that one. There's a few cloud native ones out there. I'll give a plug to one of my mates, Josh Duffney, who works at Microsoft now in the cloud advocacy group. He's got a few sessions that look really great as well. And there's also one on one of my newer favorite tools, which is Windows Terminal. Being a Microsoft and Windows guy, they're doing I think it's maybe called customizing Windows Terminal. So they'll no doubt get into all of the nitty gritty and the cool stuff you can do with Terminal. So looking forward to that one.
Wow, that sounds really exciting. And I actually know Josh from Twitter. He's a really, really smart guy. And that's actually interesting. I'll look the session up. And like you said, everybody's favorite, I think, the session with Scott and Mark together. They always have something funny to say. They always are informative. Yeah. And I think it's quite popular. Cool. Me personally, I'm actually looking up to some of the, like I said, some of the AI sessions. There's a session also about, I think, Azure functions and integration with Dapper, and also I'm also looking for a session on the Azure Arc. Cool. All right.
It's hard to prioritize, because I just want to absorb it all. It's the same with Ignite. It's like you just want to be in every session at every chat going on. Luckily a lot of them are recorded, and 3 a.m. New Zealand time is not that great, especially when you still have to do work during the day. So
That's so
luckily
true.
we lived in a hybrid world.
Yes, we do. We do. Cool. All right, so let's start it. Let's go and let's do this. Cool. First question for you, Matt. So can you please share a little bit about like your background? How did you start in the technology sector in general, and like in the cloud and the Azure world in specific?
Yeah, no worries. I feel like I have a similar journey to a lot of people, but we'll dive into it and see. So, I mean, you know, if I'm to wind the clock right back, you know, as a kid, so I'm a kid of 1990. So just to give some perspective around age and stuff like that. So I'm 30, almost 33. So, you know, at home, we kind of got our first computer. I was probably 8 or 9. So we're in the era of Windows 98. And, you know, somewhere around that was kind of our first one at home. And I was drawn to it, you know, just this amazing machine that you could type stuff into. And, you know, as an 8-year-old, not really having seen that at school or anything before that, I'd not really been exposed to a lot of technology, to be honest, before we got that. So, I remember we used to have a computer guy. I think he was a friend of the family. His name was Gary, and I used to break stuff, and Gary have to come and fix it. So
I love it.
Yeah, but not long after, you know, a few years under my belt, and I was the one able to fix it. So
nice.
you know, I kind of got into early teens, and I was gaming and playing a lot of video games and stuff like that, as a lot of us tend to do. But I was also, you know, saving all pocket money and money that I had to go and, you know, jump on eBay and buy like, you know, a motherboard. And then a few weeks later, I could afford a cheap processor, and I'd slowly kind of, you know, get these parts in and learned how to, you know, build a computer, which
yourself.
was, which was just, you know, at the time for me, it was amazing, you know, just putting these parts together and making it all work. And
that I just still probably would have been around the time of AT power supply units as well, and they had a cable out that you just could never touch, like you just didn't want to touch because you get shocked and things like that. That's
100%. Yep, that's it. Yep, right in that era. Yeah. So I kind of just, you know, I went through school through the teenage years having an interest in technology, but I wasn't sold on it as a career path or anything. I wasn't 100% like that's what I'm going to do. And I got to being when I was 16 years old, which was around year 10 or year 11. You know, you kind of trying to figure out what to do.
Mm-hmm.
In front of me, I had two immediate decisions. It was like go down this technology path, or the other one was construction, like building. You know, I'd always been interested in that and working with my hands and that kind of thing. So in the final year of school, of high school or college, I know it's going to differ all around the world with what age that is, but I was 16 or 17 years old. So in that final year, I went out on work placement with 3 different builders throughout the year. And each time I just happened to be working with a builder who was at the stage of their project where they're digging holes, like they're digging footings for a new house or a set of units, and they're literally digging holes in the ground. So I dug holes for three weeks, and I'm like, I don't want to do this, you know. And so, but for better or worse, I'm not real good working in the heat and stuff and outdoors for long periods of time. So I probably ended up picking the right career path there. So I kind of finished up school, and I didn't have any direction. I knew I didn't want to do university. I was kind of done with full-time learning at that point. And so I went and enrolled in Australia, we call it TAFE. I'm not sure what it would be around the world, but effectively it's somewhere where you can get a diploma, so halfway to a degree. So I went and enrolled in TAFE in an IT course, a certificate 4 as they call it. And that was a 12-month course. And halfway into that, little did I know, but there were some employers around town where I live in Launceston who contact the TAFE every now and then when they're looking for junior employees or new people coming through. And they're like, hey, is there anyone in your classes that's showing, you know, a lot of aptitude or interest in this area that we could potentially talk to hire them? So I ended up speaking with SMB managed service provider down here who looks after a lot of, you know, 5 to 50 people organizations is their niche, you know, doctors, surgeries, engineering firms, you know, this is back in the era of Windows Small Business Server as well. That was kind of like the bread and butter, everything on one box. I hate to think about it now, but that's what it was. So but yeah, so I ended up having a chat with them, and we aligned pretty well, and I was able to finish my certificate and diploma on the job through them. So
wow, good on
I just
you.
kind of fell into the workplace almost by accident, you could say. And I was with them for almost 5 years, and then I moved on to a job down here in Tasmania with the University of Tasmania. So in terms of the scale of organisations down here, they're kind of at the larger end. So I'd gone from MSP looking after small businesses, and I wanted to get that experience with enterprise and large scale and that kind of thing.
Nice.
And this was 2013, so remote working certainly wasn't. It was a lot harder to get in with someone who was open to remote working, so it was kind of staying local at that time. And I had a great time at the university for 3 or 4 years, and I learned a lot of great things there. I got stuck right into Exchange, so I was there for a Microsoft Windows Systems Administrator role, but
nice.
kind of also fell into cloud, Office 365, and a lot of VMware, actually, which sounds like an odd mix of things, but that's kind of where I fell into.
But that's just how you went, right? Because I did the same thing. I went from small to enterprise environments, and at the time, like, I was dealing with VMware and PowerShell and Windows and server and desktop. You're just doing it all. So
Yep.
It's
cool.
Absolutely. Cool. Yeah. Yep. Sounds very similar. So yeah, I was at the university, and then long story short, I was doing some VMware stuff, and the company I work for now, they've gone through renames and acquisitions and stuff. But back then, this was in 2016 now, they were primarily a VMware and storage, virtualization consultancy and managed service provider. And they were based out of Auckland, and they were looking for a new person to join their managed services team, doing all things VMware and data center and storage and all that goodness. So yeah, I ended up joining them and working remotely since 2016. So I've been doing the remote thing for about 7 years now, and through that company, we've evolved and we've shifted, and like I said, we've been acquired a few times. But I worked in the VMware practice for probably 4 or 5 years, and then around 2 to 3 years ago, I shifted internally across to our Azure practice, which we'd established at around 2016, 2017 was established around that same time. But I only moved across 2 or 3 years ago into the role of DevOps engineer, for lack of a better term, but that's what it is. So yeah.
Cool.
So let's talk a bit about, like, you've gone through all those different subject areas and functions, but you've also developed quite a prolific set of training courses. So more than 15 on topics like Azure, PowerShell, Windows Terminal, as you pointed Josh's course out earlier. Can you tell us a bit about the process on creating those courses and what got you into the world of creating the content to begin with?
Yeah, cool. Creating content came to me when I joined the VIFX, that were called back then, in 2016. So the company I'm with now, actually was a little bit before that. I started blogging. I think a lot of us started out with blogging, and Luke, I listened to episode 1 of this podcast, of course, where you spoke to, and I think a lot of us started here, the notion of just writing stuff down almost for yourself, right? Just as somewhere to have your notes, but you can put it public if it helps out one other person sometime, then that's awesome, and I was kind of the same, if I haven't looked at my first blog post in a while, but if I went back and looked, they're probably relatively straightforward things, and here's how to set this thing in this tool or do this thing. And I found that I really enjoyed the notion of blogging itself, but also I remember the first time that someone commented and said, thanks heaps for this. I was stuck and this helped me out. And that right there has probably,
it's a great feeling, eh?
It is, yeah. And that has probably founded the rest of my content creation path as I've gone on. Is that notion of being able to help someone, and because I've been in those shoes many times as well, where you've of course looked up something and you've come across someone's blog or video that's helped you as well. So being able to be that person to help someone really drove me to keep doing the blogging. And so I was just blogging for quite a long time, really. And I dabbled with a YouTube video or two back then in kind of 2017, 2018, but I never really, took off with it or got into it too much. And so then it got to around 3 years ago in 2020, just after COVID had hit, actually. And I've been a PluralSight customer for a long time, and I'd used a lot of their training right back to when I was at the University of Tasmania. And, I loved the trainers, loved the platform. And I'd always kind of half joked with a few mates, wouldn't it be great to be able to create some of these courses one day? With it always being in my mind that that's something I could never do. That's the quality of content. Absolutely, 100% imposter syndrome. Yeah. And we got to the point where one day we were just chatting about it, and I looked up the form at PluralSight, and there was you can apply, basically. You can apply to be an author, and you go through an audition process. And I actually applied to PluralSight, though, to build some labs out, because at that time they were looking to build a lot of their labs to complement their video courses. And the labs were being built on with Terraform. And I'd just made the shift recently into our Azure DevOps team, and I wanted some hands-on experience in addition to what I was doing at work with Terraform. And I thought, that's a pretty good use case. I can build labs. It's written content. So I was in my comfort zone of blogging and learning a bit of Terraform. So I went through the audition process for labs, and I got accepted, which was great. And then Scott Smith, who is one of the employees over at PluralSight, who's still there and does a fantastic job, one of the many things he does is the acquisitions editor. And he was chatting to me about labs, and then he's like, do you want to do a video course? How do you feel about that? And I'm like, no, there's no way I can do video courses. And he's like, look, here's the audition slide deck. Here's the process. I'll leave it with you, and you let me know if you want to audition, because you have to audition for each modality type at PluralSight. And of course, that then stuck on my mind, and I'm thinking about it of an evening and weekend and thinking, can I do it or can't I? So I kind of fumbled it's only a 10-minute demo that you've got to put together, but it's around showing them that you can tell a bit of a story and teach a concept and use slides and a demo environment and that kind of thing. So I put the first take together, shared it with some close friends. They said, cool, but here's some improvements, which I love them for, because they were candid in their feedback, which is what you really need at that point in time. And so I kind of adjusted and then resubmitted that. And then, long story short, I'm a bit rambling on here, but I got accepted to do video content for PluralSight. And at the time I thought, that's cool. I'll just wait until, something will pop up in the next, year or something that I might have a crack at, kind of thing. And literally the day after I got accepted, someone there reached out to me, because when you audition, they ask you what sort of skills you got and what area of IT you fit into. And my background with using PowerShell a lot had come up during that. And little did I know they were just about to reshoot an entire path. So Jeff Hicks, very well known PowerShell trainer, had put together a path for PluralSight, which included about 8 courses on the fundamentals of PowerShell. And they're like, hey, Jeff put this path together, but he doesn't want to film all 8 courses. He wants to do a couple of them. Do you want to do a few of these? And I'm like, oh boy, here we go. This is
this is real now.
And honestly, since then, it's just kind of, there's always been a course opportunity that's come up with PluralSight, and just over the period of almost 3 years, you kind of forget, but you look back now. When Luke mentioned it, and he said, you've done 15 courses. I'm like, have I? That built up pretty quickly, but it's just been that back to back. Just happens to be opportunities in an area that I have got a lot of knowledge or a decent amount of knowledge, like enough to learn a little bit and then put something together and
reteach it.
But
that's also not your full-time role. You're doing this on the side, or?
Yeah, that's right. So so it's absolutely has been nights and weekends and early mornings and all that sort of thing. And recently I have shifted across to part-time with my employer, so I work 4 days a week with them, and I've got 1 day kind of to myself to do all of this sort of stuff, content creation and some trying to get more into the community stuff, which I'm sure we'll touch on as well. But yeah, that's kind of just how I fell into the PluralSight stuff. And I mean, when it comes to the process of creating a course, I think I certainly underestimated the amount of effort that goes into creating content, and that can be anything. Like you see it's like the classic iceberg meme, or not meme, but the graphic that you see. You see a little bit on the top, and there's this massive iceberg underneath of all the effort that went into that thing that you don't see. And I very quickly got an appreciation of how much effort and time goes into that. And me personally, in general, I'm an overthinker as well. But I spend a lot of time on my outlining and planning. So really trying to figure out, what am I trying to teach in this course? What are the topics we need to hit, and logically, how does that kind of flow? And I'll go through and I'll build out my demos. I'll get all of that in place before I even think about hitting the record button. And then there's all the fun of trying to record it and then listen to yourself and do all the editing and all that sort of fun. So I've learned a lot about. I've got much more to learn, but I've certainly learned a lot about just production in general over the last couple of years as well.
Actually, it's funny that you say that like you started actually did you say like started 3 years ago in the world of Azure? That's actually quite amazing, because it sounds like you started at the same time when you started to do those courses. It's just there must be something actually, like there's big drive behind, and like you said, it's a lot of work, and it must be something that actually driving you to share that knowledge and be the person who's creating that content. And I know that feeling, and Luke as well, because creating content is like, it feels there is like the joy is actually in the process of creating content. But there's more to it. Like you've got like your presence on, like I see you're very active on Twitter. You've got, like I said, you're trying to work something on, did some work on YouTube. But I just want to go back again to like this process of creating that much, that amount of courses. What is the drive to actually share that knowledge? What is it that is inside you driving you to do that?
I think it's that I've always, myself, I've always been a learner. Like I find it very hard, for better or worse, to switch off. That's probably a whole other topic that we could chat about sometime. But I find it hard to switch off, but I enjoy learning. I enjoy getting to the bottom of things and understanding how things work. And to that note, I think that when you look at our industry, in particular, it's obviously broad. There's a lot of stuff. It's moving quickly. No one's going to know everything. And I think that wherever you are in your career, there's always someone that's behind you. And I don't mean that from a hierarchical perspective, but there's always someone who's either new into the field or new into your area of IT. There might be developers or security engineers who need to learn something about DevOps or PowerShell or whatever it might be. So everyone has always got some knowledge to pass on. I know not everyone thinks that they do, but they absolutely do. And for me, it's just that ability and that feeling of knowing that I can help someone else get from where they are now to being a little bit better with this topic. That's what continues to drive me, as I'm doing this.
It's an interesting one, because I have imposter syndrome all the time about the content I create and the people that I talk to. But someone said to me a couple of years ago, it was actually in a Twitter thread, it's kind of like, well, why would I write? My question was, why would I write an article about X when Microsoft already has it covered, or someone else has already got it covered in videos? And because there's a lot of kind of duplicate content out there, right? So why would I double up? and what they said to me is probably the most helpful. One of the most helpful advice was your perspective is what's different about it. It's kind of like the way I word stuff, the way I approach stuff, the problems I've run into could be completely different from the same person. I'm going to go even in, Bing or Google or your favorite search engine and type in blah, 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 blah. I'm going to probably find my own content because I write that way. I know I'm thinking that way. Someone else will find someone else's content. It's all about just getting the stuff out there, right?
It's so true. And yeah, perspective matters a lot. And kind of like you touched on, so does style as well. Two people may take a topic of, what does Azure Storage do, and take two totally different approaches at writing it, but end up with the same, material under the hood. But to consume that, I might love this article, but I might find this one really challenging to read, or vice versa. And that's there's a lot of gold in what that person said, Luke, in that thread for sure. Yeah.
So let's talk about certification. So this is a hot topic, depending on who you talk to, but you've going back to your content creation stuff, you've created a lot around earning certifications in general. Do you have any opinions on why you believe people should pursue them or not? Or what are your thoughts in general about being certified?
Yeah, contentious topic for sure. It's a good one to have though, or it's a good discussion to have. My take on it, I guess, to set some context, my first certification was the VMware Certified Professional, VCP. It's like their bread and butter, and I did that in 2016 when I joined the company I'm with now. So I went 7 or 8 years in my career without ever sitting a certification. So but ever since I sat that one in 2016, I've almost always had kind of one on the go at some point. I do take breaks and stuff from certifications, but when I finish one, I'll have a quick breather and then I'll kind of, plan the next one almost. So I've got a bunch of VMware certifications. I've done a bunch of the Microsoft ones in Azure. So I obviously find some value in certifications, but I think that there's a few things to unpack. And for me, the first one is probably, if you went and Googled, what's the benefit of an IT certification, you're probably going to come up with articles that will tell you that you can probably get paid a bit more or find better paying jobs, and that they will help with the process for applying for new jobs because you can put your certs on your, on your CV or your resume and whatever. And both of those are probably true to different extents. I think that the HR screening, for lack of a better term, is getting less valuable in terms of the certifications, because I've spoken to a lot of candidates who come through with a plethora of certifications, and then you start to talk to them and you quickly find out that maybe they haven't done all these certifications, or they don't have the real world experience, and maybe they've just done a lot of certifications. So there's kind of that aspect to it. But for me, what I like about certifications, and the reason that I do them myself, is because, for lack of a better term, it's a structured learning path for a particular topic or goal.
Nice.
So when I was coming into Azure, I had looked around and I dabbled with a few things, and I'd used the fundamental services, I'd done some VMs and some web apps and a little bit of storage account and that kind of thing. But I'm like, there's obviously so much here, and there's so much that I don't know. And I went and looked at back then it was the AZ 103, it's the 104 now. And that's a broad exam. Or broad certification. There's a lot of stuff in there, and for me, it forced me almost to go and learn these things and things that I might not have found on my own. Nice. But not only learn them for the certification, but like I say, have a bit of a structured learning path. Some actual objectives to look through, and yes, some of it, sometimes the vendor will point you in a particular direction, and you might end up learning some stuff that maybe, isn't that prevalent in the real world. But
yeah,
that's why I like certifications, is because it helps me learn a product or a feature and understand what the vendor wants me to know about it, which usually translates pretty well to how does this thing get used in the real world. So
nice.
And
yes.
some partners need certifications for their program as well. So there is, sometimes there is requirements for a job or a role to have X certification because they need to meet their vendor support requirements. But I'm in the same boat. I love the certifications because they're a learning path. They give
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that's like just amazing, both points that Matt and Luke you mentioned. For me, like if someone is trying to get a certification, it's two things. First of all, like what Matt said, it's about having some structured learning, like that this is the start of the learning journey and that it ends here. And of course, certification is amazing to have. Maybe it's not the goal, having like a long list of certification with no experience. But the other thing that I found, like I was just talking to some person the other day, is that it actually puts some responsibility on you. Like when you pass this certificate, it does two things. First of all, you start to be on the radar of a lot of people. People like, oh yeah, you just passed this thing. Can you actually do this? And even if you don't have experience, even if you never worked on this thing, it's good to have a certification because it actually helps you to challenge yourself. That's one thing. And then second thing, once you've got this certificate, you start to feel some responsibility, and then you start to like even read more, explore more, and then try to learn more stuff just to feel like what Luke just mentioned, the imposter syndrome. You feel entitled for this certificate, and that's one of the actually beauty of actually passing a certificate. Even if you feel that you don't have the skills to back it up or like experience, just go for it. It's a great learning, and it's gonna pay later on because of the feeling that comes with it. So back to you again, Matt, and you mentioned at the start that you are a DevOps engineer, and for someone who's like listening to us, DevOps is a really awesome starting step for a person who's like trying to learn how to do stuff in the new world of the cloud. And again, the term DevOps is like kind of really hard to like define and say this is the DevOps. But from your experience, being a person like who's always learning, a person who's like going for certification, creating courses for people, what do you think a person who's like now trying to become a DevOps, what do they need to do, or like what kind of skills that you would imagine would help them to become to put their foot on the first step on becoming a DevOps engineer?
Yeah, I think it depends a little bit on background, but we can get into the nuances of that. Are you a developer coming into this cloud world, or are you like my path and Luke's path, are you more of the IT admin infrastructure person coming into this world? So it depends a little bit on that. But I think when you break it down into some of the fundamental skills that you'll really need to have, no matter where you come from, the first thing to wind it back to a holistic view is really an automation mindset. And you don't need to always automate everything. Sometimes there's knowledge in knowing what shouldn't be automated versus what should be.
That's right.
But always having that mindset of being aware and trying to identify, what's slowing people down, where can people be, have their mundane tasks replaced by process and automation, that kind of thing. And I think if we're to talk a bit more tactically about some, not necessarily tools, but some concepts, certainly things like source control, containerization is and has been prevalent for a number of years. Infrastructure as code, one of my loves that. Well, I do a lot of infrastructure as code in a few of the popular tools. And just this week I was working with a customer who hadn't done any infrastructure as code. They were in Azure, they had their app up there, but they were feeling the pain of manually deploying stuff. And we spent a few hours with them, and we went through just the basics of Azure Bicep in this case, because they were all in Azure. And, we didn't do anything outrageous. I just showed them a template that deployed, a virtual network and their web app and a database and a few little components in, and it deployed in like 2.5 minutes or something like that, right? And their mind was just blown. And I'm just like, there's, I love that there's still a lot of people out there who haven't experienced a lot of this stuff and seen the power of it yet. So, yeah, infrastructure as code is a big one. And then, CI/CD and the tooling that goes around, automation of builds and deployments. And that's probably getting a bit more into the dev side of things. But coming from my background of never, like, the only thing that I can really read and write properly is PowerShell. Like, I can fumble my way through a bit of Python and that kind of thing, but sit me in front of C# and good luck kind of thing. So, one of the things that I've enjoyed in this role is the exposure that I've gotten just working with alongside software developers, and it's funny, this role takes much more communication than I thought it was going to. You need to talk to people, a lot more. And a lot of us, kind of fell into IT because we sit here and work with our computers, and here we are now, in communities talking with people and at work, communicating a lot more with people. But I work so often with developers who, they know how to build their application on their machine, but they don't necessarily know how to translate that into a GitHub Actions workflow or a Azure DevOps pipeline to automate that from end to end. So, and vice versa, if the build gets stuck halfway and it's, having issues with these dependencies and that, I'm going to go back to them because I need their help with it. So, and that's kind of that's the wishy-washy love story of DevOps, right? Is this union and working together and the collaboration. So, yeah. So that's kind of the main building blocks, I think. The last few years has really started to show that there's also a security mindset that I think as a DevOps engineer or someone in this space that you really need to.
It's everyone's responsibility, right?
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. You don't need to be the ins and out and know everything about security and have that the depth that a security professional would have, but certainly you can't just leave it alone and hope that it sorts itself out, because it won't. So so to bring that back to some DevOps things, things like doing scanning of container images and security scanning in pipelines of code bases and secrets management, all that sort of fun stuff that you end up getting into. So I feel like that's the fundamentals. And it's funny with DevOps, I feel like if you tried to come out of school or university and go straight into something like that, I think you're going to have a really hard time, because I've leveraged so much of my 10 to 15 years of historical experience and knowledge on things like how DNS works and the fundamentals of kind of computing that allowed me to get into here and know how infrastructure works and how things tie together and subnetting in virtual networks and all that fun. So
you have to feel the pain first, right? It's You have to feel the pain first.
I actually feel your pain because I come from a networking background. I worked for I don't know, like you said, 10, 12 years as a network architect. And when the first time I actually was introduced to the idea of the cloud or Azure, I was like, okay, so are you building stuff on someone else's data center? I was like, what? It wasn't the whole concept, but as soon as you start to realize it's just a layer on top of a lot of infrastructure, you don't have to worry about that. You just build on top of it. It starts to make sense step by step, and you start to realize, oh, actually, we should have been doing this from the start, from the get-go. That's just awesome. And just to add one thing before, I like the idea when you were talking about when you explain a concept to someone and you feel that the light in their eyes and the almost like a light bulb, and then you feel that joy in the eyes of a person who's like just understood a very hard topic, that feeling is just worth it. That feeling of creating someone and then someone goes there, read your content, watch your video, like even in person, the feeling that you explain something to someone and the joy in their eyes that they understood it is just amazing.
Yeah, it really is. And, you know, somewhat it's a little bit selfish, I guess, because, you know, you get the dopamine hit and stuff like that. But, you know, so that there's that part of it, I suppose, that, you know, and that's why we feel good. But yeah, I truly love it when you can help someone through something and to the other side, and you can, like you say, you see that light bulb, you can see the moment that they get it, and it's like, you know, yes, you know, that's the achievement for today. You know, that's a win kind of thing. So
Nice.
one more thing to touch on, if I can, before we move off the, you know, DevOps engineer and what you should learn. So there was quite a lot of stuff there, and I probably only scratched the surface of the things that you'll end up working with as a DevOps engineer or someone in a similar role. And I guess for anyone that might be listening who's in administrator or cloud engineer roles and starting to work with this stuff, who looks at this, it can be a lot to, you know, you can go and Google or listen to what I just said, and that's a lot of stuff to try and figure out. And I guess my advice there would just be to break it down a bit and just take pieces of it at a time. You know, don't try and do it all. Don't try and do containers and source control and infrastructure as code and CI/CD, because you'll probably end up just floundering a bit, not really getting anywhere, and then finding it really hard. So I guess my advice would be that if you're at a company that, you know, has ability for you to grow into some of these areas, maybe find out where they don't have expertise or where they're under-resourced. You know, maybe your company does a lot of stuff with customers with infrastructure as code, but they're not able to deliver all of the tasks for those customers. So maybe you could focus on infrastructure as code for the next 3 or 4 months and try and get some, you know, experience under your belt that way, and then kind of move on from there. It's not an overnight thing, that's for sure. And, you know, I'm kind of 3 years into this air quotes DevOps, and I feel like I've only just started myself. So yeah,
I like that. Yeah, step by step, because it's like same background as you, IT, sysadmin, you know, jack of all trades, master of none. Git was this was many like years ago, but it's like Git was entirely new concept to me. It was definitely SVN and stuff. Only developers did it. We didn't do any of that. But I wrote a lot of PowerShell scripts. And then that was my first, you know, into DevOps and stuff, was instead of having all these versions named 001 and 002 of my PowerShell scripts, let's put it into a Git repo somewhere, and that's just a start.
I did exactly the same. If I went back and looked at my first couple of GitHub repositories, they've probably got like one PowerShell script in them, because I was going through the cycles of, you know, how does this work, and you know, what does this, you know, Git push thing do, and what's a branch, and figuring that out. I remember the first time I was trying to enhance a community project, this was back in the VMware space. There was some automation to spin up some lab environments, and I wanted to help, and I forked the main repository into my area, and I'd made the changes, and then I'd kind of spoken to the original person whose project it was, and they're like, oh yeah, can you just submit a pull request and we'll merge that in and whatever. And I'm like, damn, I don't know what he's talking about, you know, but, you know, let's figure it out. And it's, you know, it's those things that elevate you and move you forward. So yeah.
So DevOps is one end of the spectrum, right? So what about the people that are new to, you know, the technology industry, whether that because they've come from a career change or they've just come out of school? Do you have any advice you'd offer them?
I mean, the general, like the non-technical advice for people entering this field that I would have loved someone to tell me when I was kind of falling into place when I was, you know, 17 or 18. The few things that I like to try and tell people is, the first one is to acknowledge that you're entering or have entered a fast-paced, changing industry, and get it's the classic get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and being okay with learning and change. I forget the exact quote, but I remember Jeffrey Snover, inventor of PowerShell, very, very well-known guy. I remember he had a comment somewhere that was basically, if you don't enjoy learning, then go and learn about trees, because there's a finite amount of trees that exist in the world, and you'll learn them all, and then you're kind of done. If you don't like learning, then IT and is probably the wrong area for you. So I think that's the main thing. Accept that you won't know everything. Be willing to ask for help. And something that I probably didn't do early enough was just be inquisitive and ask people questions and just dive into topics. And one of the things that I love about both VMware and the Microsoft products is the community that surrounds them. As I've kind of shifted from VMware into this Microsoft world, I've started to get to know a lot of people in the Microsoft community, a lot of MVPs, and everyone is willing to give you the time of, some time in their day. If you ask for it, everyone is willing to help. And the worst thing that you'll get from someone is a no. Like that's the absolute worst case scenario that I find. So leveraging the community and giving back are probably the main things as well. Yeah. But so yeah, that was all non-technical, advice to someone new, I guess. But that's where I'd angle it.
That's actually just an awesome advice. And like you said, in general, the technology world, like in general, the community is just amazing. But what I found when I jumped into the cloud in the Azure community, specifically, they are so willing to help and so willing. Like when, for example, this podcast, when we first started it, like we got so much great feedback and encouragement, and people like yourself, a lot of people offer to actually jump in and help. It is just so beautiful, and it both shows that people in the community out there, if you want to ask, don't be afraid, just go there, ask someone. And like you said, the worst thing, you'd ask someone, I was like, hey, do you know how to do this or whatever? They just say no, but most likely they'll say, yeah, I might not know, but maybe Matt knows or Luke knows about this. And that's like the worst case scenario. So actually, that was an awesome session, Matt, that we really loved and enjoyed talking to you. And for just to make sure that if people wanted to reach out to you to ask for help or like to maybe guidance on the topic, what is the best way actually for people to reach out to you? What is the best way for people to, if they wanted to contact you or talk about a technology topic?
Yeah, awesome. The easiest ways are probably the socials. The main ones that I'm on is LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm finding LinkedIn is getting a lot more engagement. Might be the Musk factor, might not sure. But I'm still active on both LinkedIn and Twitter. My handle or username is just my name, so it's Matt MATT Allford ALLFORD. So more than happy to connect, to chat to people out there in the community and help out wherever I can. That's for sure. So yeah.
Beautiful. We'll leave your handles in the description of the video. That is just awesome, Matt. Really appreciate your time and appreciate you jumping in.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad I was able to keep it under an hour, because I am definitely an introvert, but when I get on things like this, I kind of boost myself up, and then I can end up waffling for quite a long time. So yeah.
We really loved your journey, and it's just a beautiful journey, because a lot of people in the audience most likely will relate to your journey, and we are hoping with this podcast that your journey, the people we had Luke before that, people in this podcast will inspire others to follow and to jump in the world of technology and jump in the world of Azure specifically. And that's awesome. Cool. Thank you so much, mate.
No, thanks for having me, and I'm really looking forward to all the future episodes. I know that you'll be speaking to some fantastic people as well. So, yeah.
Cool. Thank you. That is awesome. Thank you, everyone who's listening. Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks all. See ya.